Yeah. So there's a story that one day the Alter Rebbe, the Baal HaHilula, called in a younger man. A young man, probably wasn't that young, but in the story, the way the Rebbe repeated it and related it once at a Fabrengen, he called him a younger man, a young man. And the Alter Rebbe said, I want to go in with you into business. I want to make a deal with you. I want to strike a deal with you. Machen a Geschäft. The person was obviously quite astounded to have such a business partner as the Alter Rebbe. But then he explained to him what the deal was. You see, you have a mitzvah and I have a mitzvah. There's a mitzvah I have. It says in Torah and Chumash, we say it every day, more than once. V'shinantam levanecha. You have to teach your child, your children Torah. It's a mitzvah's essay min ha-Torah on every single father, even in America 2013, to actually teach their child Torah. I have a son. The Mittler Rebbe had 3 sons. He was referring to the child at the time, the Mittler Rebbe, Rabbi Dov Ber, who later would be the second Chabad Rebbe. I have an obligation to teach him Torah. That's my mitzvah. You also have a mitzvah. There's a pasuk in Parashas Mishpatim, She'era ksusa v'inasa lo yigra. A husband is obligated min ha-Torah to support his wife and to support his children. And that also applies even in America, 2013. As I tell sometimes the young Galite that I found in Kabbalah a great zgula for Parnasa, and that is to get a job. It's one of the great, great mystical ideas, but this is an obligation that a husband is obligated to support his family. So you have a mitzvah to support the family. I have a mitzvah to teach my child Torah. Let's exchange mitzvahs. You do my mitzvah for me, and I will do your mitzvah for you. Now the Alter Rebbe could have said it in very simple words. Why don't you teach my child and I'll pay you? But that's how we would say it. The Alter Rebbe gave it the context. He gave just the way he presented it. He gave it the depth. There's 2 mitzvahs. You'll do my mitzvah, and I will do your mitzvah. When the Rebbe said the story, he said, Weißt euch, as the younger man is given a kluge. You know, sometimes you deal with somebody who may be very knowledgeable, aber is nicht kein kluge, which means, how do I translate it? Not clever, he doesn't get it. That's how we say it. But this person is given a kluge, he understood. He understood what an opportunity means. So he Doesn't say yes. He tells the Alter Rebbe it's an unfair deal. Why is it an unfair deal? Because for you to do my mitzvah is very simple. It's about money. It's about supporting my wife and children. You give me the money to support them, it's a simple mitzvah. But for me to do your mitzvah is a complicated feat. You want me to educate your child, you have to know how to educate a child. This you have to teach me. So the Alter Rebbe responded, as usual, after a dveikus, after a meditation, and he would always speak with a melody, with a special nigun. Even regular conversation by the Alter Rebbe was done very often with a melody, with a nigun. And he said that the haschalas hachinuch, the beginning of the way we educate a child, is Aleph Beis. You begin with Aleph Beis. Within Aleph Beis itself, you begin with what? With Aleph, the letter Aleph. So the beginning of all Jewish education, of all Torah education, is Aleph. Was is an Aleph? What is an Aleph? And now I'll say it over verbatim, as the Rebbe said it at a Fabrengen, in the Nigun of the Alter Rebbe. I think it was Yud Shvat Tavshin Tezayin. I believe the 10th of Shvat, 1956. Was is an Aleph? A pin telefon oben, a pin telefon unten, das is an Aleph. A Yud von oben, a Yud von unten, a Kav von Yiras Shamayim be'emtza, das is an Aleph. An Aleph is shaped that there is a little Yud on the top, a little Yud on the bottom, and in between them there is a line that connects the higher Yud to the lower Yud. And that's the foundation of what educating a child is. To teach a child, there is a Yud from above. That is Hashem, the source, the creator. There is a Yud below, that's Ayid, that's this child. This child is Ayud below. And then there is his mission in life, to always have the Kav, the line of Yira Shamayim, the relationship with Hashem, the awe of Hashem, the love of Hashem, the commitment to Hashem that connects the two. Parenthetically, I once played the recording of this story to my children in the house one night. If anybody ever heard the recording, the Rebbe cries very, very intensively when he tells over the story. And he repeats what the Alter Rebbe said. So I asked my children, why do you think the Rebbe is crying? What is so melancholy or sad about the story? With Alter Rebbe is explaining what education is and what an Aleph is. So different ones of them came up with different explanations. But one of them, who's named after the Alter Rebbe, said that the reason the Rebbe was crying is the fact that you need a kav to connect the two yuds. The fact that there is a need to link the two, that is what's so sad. So I told him that you remind me of a story that the Alter Rebbe was once traveling and he came to a certain city and parents were bringing their children for a blessing, and a mother, a widow, lifted up two children to the wagon and asked the Alter Rebbe to bless them. One was a 9-year-old boy, his name was Yisrolik. He comes up to the wagon, he tells the Alter Rebbe, I have a question. Now here's a question of a 9-year-old boy. I'll say it in Yiddish. Once we say Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, v'kemen zagen v'haftas Hashem Elokecha. Once you say Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, which means what? Hashem is one, which really means the only reality is Hashem. How can you say v'hafta, you should love? Who is the you that loves? Who is the you that loves? Where is you? If the whole reality, truthfully, is only Hashem and everything is in Hashem, what's v'hafta? Where's you? So the Alter Rebbe says immediately, because in the middle you interrupted with Baruch Shem. Now, of course, if you learn the Alter Rebbe's Chassidus, you know that Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad is called, and you'll all learn this one day, Yichudei Elah, the higher unity. Baruch Shem Kvod Malchus Elolam Vad is what? Yichudei Tata, the lower level of unity. In the higher level of unity, there's no you, there's no v'ahavta. In the lower level of unity, there's I who love Hashem. Once you say Baruch Shem, therefore you could say v'ahavta, which is how the Alter Rebbe explains what the Gemara says in Psachim, the Mishnah and Gemara in Psachim, that Anshe Yericha Hayukarchin es Shema. The people of Yericha used to sandwich Shema. So one of the explanations in Gemara is what? They eliminated Baruch Shem Kvod Malchus Elolam Vod. From Shema they went to V'ahavta. What's the big deal? They wanted Yichud Eilah. They didn't want the lower level of unity. So Yichud Eilah, he's crying why you have to connect the two. Why you have to connect the higher Yud and the lower Yud. Because really on a higher level you don't have to connect them. They're absolutely one. The fact that you have to connect them, this is because there's some type of separation that has to be undone. So therefore, today, as fathers are here with children gathered for Chavdalet Tevis, the objective is the beginning and the end, and the middle is the Aleph. Now it's 200 years since the passing of the Alter Rebbe, and I thought, wouldn't it be appropriate to define what we learned over these 200 years? But how can one define in 20 minutes what has been taught over 200 years? So, I quote from you a fabulous paragraph. This is in 1962, Tafshin Chav Beis, for the first time, the Tanya was published in English. Never before has it been published in English. Dr. Nissim Mendel of blessed memory wrote the translation, and it was published in 62. Who wrote the preface to the book, to the Tanya in English? The Rebbe. Preface by the Lubavitcher Rebbe, signed Lag BaOmer 5722, 1962. I want to read to you the first paragraph, because in one paragraph, who better than the Rebbe of Chabad, the successor of the Alter Rebbe, can define what was taught in the past 200 years. Now, I have to caution you, every word here contains literally a universe. You'll hear. Every sentence has probably hundreds of discourses and maimarim that elucidate it. Some of the words may be a little complicated to you, but I'm going to explain it. I quote the Rebbe now, the first paragraph of his preface to the English Tanya. Chassidus in general, and Chabad Chassidus in particular, is an all-embracing world outlook and way of life, which sees the Jew's central purpose as the unifying link between Creator and creation. The Jew is a creature of heaven and of earth, of a heavenly divine soul, which is truly a part of godliness, clothed in an earthly vessel, constituted of a physical body and animal soul, whose purpose is to realize the transcendency and unity of his nature and of the world in which he lives within the absolute unity of God. So who is the Chassidus Chabad sees? The Jew as the central purpose. His central purpose, he is the link, the unifying link between Creator and creation. And the reason he can be that link is because he himself has a soul which is heavenly, and he's an earth which is earthly, and his purpose is to show the ultimate unity of it all and the link of it all. I want to try to illustrate a little bit of this and to try to make it palpable and practical for all of us, young people sitting in this room with a very bright and promising future ahead of you here in the Klurman Mesivta, and a, God willing, a long and prosperous and happy life ahead of you. I'm going to illustrate it with a story and then with an illustration of two sports. The first idea. A Jew is a creature of heaven and earth, of a heavenly divine soul which is truly a part of godliness. What does this mean? So they tell a story about a king who went hunting. Like all the old stories, every king went hunting. And he's in a forest. And of course he's dressed in simple clothes because he wants to have a good time. He wants to be a sport. And he's having the time of his life, but it starts raining. And the rain turns into a storm. And the storm turns into hail and ice and snow. He was not hunting in Miami Beach. And it gets dark before the time. And he finds himself lost in this huge forest or jungle. And before he knows it, he hears Hakfidim Shayagim Lataref Ulavakish Me'el Achlam. The undomesticated beasts are searching for their prey, and he realizes that sooner or later he's going to end up as a dinner meal in the abdomen of one of the less refined beasts in the jungle. It's not a very cool way for a monarch to end his life. Desperately, he starts searching for refuge. And of course, as in all the stories, he finds, the last moment, a hut. And the hut has a little lantern, and he knocks on the door in the hut, and a peasant opens up the door and takes him in, and changes his clothes, which are drenched, and gives him a hot bowl of soup and a hot cup of water, and gives him some straw to lie on, and he sleeps through the night, and he recovers in the morning. And before he leaves, he tells the peasant, I am the king of this country, and I will reward you handsomely. And the peasant says, you probably have lost your mind in the process of your fear, but God willing, you'll go home, you'll see a doctor, and you will come back to yourself. I don't think you're exactly the king. Okay, he says goodbye, shows him the path. He gets to the palace. A few days later, indeed, he is summoned to the royal palace. He goes into the king, and he sees, Hinehuzah, this is the guy. This is his majesty. And the man tells him, I really want to reward you for saving my life. But what am I going to give you? Gold, silver, gems, money? For me, this is meaningless. I'll give that to you as well, but that's not a real gift because I have so much of it. I want to give you a gift that will entail a sacrifice. So therefore, I'm going to give you my most cherished item in the world. I have a nightingale. Nightingale is a lovely bird that produces and sings beautiful songs. Not as nice as the Leibovitch twins, but the nightingale sings beautiful, beautiful melodies. And whenever I'm in a bad mood, I listen to the nightingale's harmony and voice, and my spirit is uplifted. I love my nightingale, and I'm going to give you my nightingale because that is a real sacrifice for me, in tribute to you for saving my life. And the simple peasant thanks the king, and he takes the nightingale and he goes home. 2 years later, the king is hunting again in the same place. He sees the hut, and he remembers the story. He knocks on the door. The peasant comes to the door. Your Majesty. He says, tell me, how is my nightingale? I crave to hear a concerto of my nightingale. I want to hear the symphonies. I want to hear its ballads. Come, take me. Let me hear my nightingale. And the man says, Your Majesty, what are you talking about? What nightingale? He says, don't you remember that lovely bird I've given you 2 years ago, which emits the most splendid music in the world? He says, I don't recall, remind me. He says, that day when you saved my life and I called you to the palace and I gave you the bird, I want to hear it. He says, Your Majesty, I'll tell you exactly what happened. I took the bird home that night and I cooked it and I tried eating it, but the meat was so tough, it's not really made to be eaten. But you know what? I'm a good chef. So I sauteed it with onions and potatoes, and I spiced it up with different vegetables, and it turned out into a gourmet dinner. I'm a chaya. You would be proud of the culinary skills of your servant. Of course, the anecdote tells the story about a nightingale, which for one person is a piece of meat made to be cooked, and for another person can produce the most beautiful music in the world. Essentially, I think this is a metaphor for the first idea, major idea of the Alter Rebbe and Tanya, that you have a soul, and the soul is godly. We often look at ourselves and we don't appreciate what we have inside. You young people are going to grow up and you look at yourself, what do you see? You could see yourself simply as a piece of meat. Body, blood, bones, sinews. And we do have meat within ourselves. Some of us a little more than others, but we do have meat. But there's another part of us that is capable of producing and experiencing the most profound, ecstatic music in the world. So the first step in understanding who you are is that throughout your entire life to recognize not just your physical, external, superficial self, but to recognize the incredible, infinite, spiritual, godly depth that you have in you, which you can access. Point number one. Point number two, because the Jew has this, he serves as the link between creator and creation. Now, let's go down 7 generations. The Rebbe, one of his perspectives and teachings, which he attempted always to convey, was to take the deepest ideas of Chassidus, of Torah in general, and apply it in the most tangible, practical way. To the point that the Rebbe would sometimes employ metaphors to illustrate an idea. And once he spoke about a sport, and it was what the Rebbe called then football, because that's what they call it in Europe, but here we Americans call it soccer. And he used that game, talking about children playing soccer, what he called football, because really it's football, it's not soccer, right? What we call football is just Americans are bissel tzemish. So what we throw with our hands we call football. But football is soccer. Football. So it was Shabbos Shmini, I think, Tovshin Mem Aleph, 1981. And he explained what the soccer game is, or what he called the football game. And he said as follows. Look at the soccer ball. Or you can look at the basketball. I know you guys play probably basketball more than soccer, right? Huh? I won't tell, don't worry. Okay. So you could also look at the basketball in your imagination or the soccer ball. And he said, what is it a symbol of? It's a symbol of Kader Haaretz, the globe, the planet Earth, the round planet, that is a ball. We live in a ball. And this ball is being kicked around by 2 teams. And every team has an objective. And the objective is to kick the ball into the goal. And each team wants to get the ball into the other direction. And he explained, the ball is the world. And there are 2 teams always competing over the world. One team, this is the team that represents the role of the Jewish people and of Torah, is to kick the ball, as he put it, into Shar HaMelech, into the goal of the king. To quote the Rebbe, Nemen de Kadur, to take the ball und es hereinwerfen in Atzilus herein. To take the world and kick it into Atzilus, which means to elevate it back to its source. Show that the world is one with Hashem. But there's another team, and the other team is trying to throw the same world and plunge it into a very opposite reality. Show that the world is ungodly, is not good, is not holy, is not sacred, it's not pure, and there's a fierce battle. And the battle continues throughout history. But the main limb and organ which you use to play soccer is not your head, although you could kick the ball with your head, especially if you know what you're doing, and not with your heart, and certainly not with your arms or hands. The primary limb to play the game is with your legs and with your feet, with your akef. Which means, in life too, the primary way of changing the world and changing yourself and elevating it is through action. You have to understand, you have to feel, you need a mind, you need a heart, but ultimately you need boots on the ground, you need your feet and your legs to kick the ball. And what's important is, you have to run and sweat and work hard, but then you can take the ball and plunge it in and throw it into the Shar HaMelech. In the process, you have to pass. You can't just do things on your own. We have to pass, we have to work together, we have to love each other, we have to tolerate each other, appreciate each other, respect each other, cherish each other. You pass the ball, and with the feet, you throw the ball into the Shar HaMelech. So the Jew who has a soul always knows he is the link that links the ball with its creator. But there's another side to it. As he continues, we don't only have heaven in us, we also have clothed in an earthly vessel constituted of a physical body and an animal soul. We're not just nightingales. We also have a different side to us. We have an animal soul. We have a Yetzer Hara. We have a body. Here we come to another game that the Rebbe once discussed to illustrate another point. Probably not called a sport, more a game, but it's the game of chess. One of the chess champions in America, U.S. chess champion, was a Jew named Sam Reshevsky. Shmuel Reshevsky. He used to live in the Crown Heights section of Brooklyn. He was an observant Jew, and he played international tournaments, especially between the Soviet Union and America in the 1950s, and became a great chess champion, and he was also a religious Jew. And in the 40s, he used to daven in a little shtibel. It was then a little shtibel called 770 Eastern Parkway. And one year in 1948, Tavshin Ches Shabbos Mevarchim, at the Kiddush, after davening, it was a very small Kiddush, the Rebbe noticed that Sam Reshevsky stayed for the Kiddush. So the Sikha, the talk, that Shabbos was about chess. And what did he say about chess? You should now figure it out from the soccer, because there's a shnit, there's a board, and you have two teams. One is black and one is white. One is dark and one is more luminescent, bright. In each team, you have the same pieces. So you have the king, you have the queen, you have to help me out here, you have the bishop, and the rook, and the knight, and of course you have the pawns, the great pawns. And there's a war, and everyone is trying to do the same thing, checkmate the king. So he explained, the king represents Hashem. King represents Hashem. Whatever you have in one team, you have in another team. Why do you have it in another team? Because if not, there can't be free choice. So every piece on this side, you also have on the other side. And they compete with each other. Everybody wants to checkmate their king. So he said as follows. The king represents Hashem. Who is the queen? The queen represents, so to speak, what we call the Shechina. Hashem's queen, Hashem's spouse. Matrunissa, Malchus, Rachel, Knesset Yisrael. The source of all the souls, which is, so to speak, married to Hashem, like Hashem's Kivayachal, Hashem's spouse, the Shechina, the queen. And then you have the rook, the knight, and the bishop. They fly around the board. Who are those? So every morning in davening, you talk about three types of angels, malachim. Srafim, Chayos, and Oifanei HaKodesh. In Chassidus, they are associated with Bria, Yitzira, and Asiya. So he said those are the rooks, the knights, and the bishops. And they fly around. Angels are free to go when they want. They fly this way and that way. They're not obstructed. And then you have the pawns. Who are the pawns? Who do you think? Us. Us. Pawns walk very slowly, one step at a time. We get knocked right, left, and center. You can't go diagonally. You can't jump. You can't go in any other direction. You go very slow. You're also very short. You're very short. And you're sent out to be killed and knocked all the time. And you progress. But something happens. When the pawn gets to the other side of the board, it can turn into a queen. When the bishop or the castle, the rook or the knight gets to the other side of the board, what happens? Nothing. They remain what they are. And he said, this is life. The pawns come down into this world, into a body, into an animal soul, and we walk very slowly, which means we struggle, we get knocked, we fail, we stumble, because we don't only have a divine soul, we also have a piece of earth, which is why we are the ones who can link Hashem and the world, which is why we are the ones who are in the center of the struggle to connect truth with falsehood, depth with superficiality, ruchnius with gashmius, heaven and earth. Came the Alter Rebbe and taught, don't think that your path as a Jewish teenager, and I'm now talking to the teenagers, when the Tatas wollen schon allein verstehen, don't think that what does it mean to be a good Jew, to be a chassid? It means that you become a piece of heaven. You're an angel, you're a tzaddik, you're a malach. No. We don't want that. The moment you become that, you're not anymore a link between heaven and earth, between creator and creation. Now, you became a bishop, you became a knight, you became a horse. Well, not a horse, but maybe. But you became very holy, you're flying around. But we're pawns. We have a combination of the highest of the high and of the lowest of the low. And we experience both, and sometimes every single day. And that's natural, it's normal, it was supposed to be that way, you can't expect differently, and you don't have to be different. What you do have to realize is that serving Hashem as this pawn, slowly progressing step by step while you get knocked. You come to the end of the board, and what happens? You're transformed into a queen, which becomes completely one with Hashem. Malachim are called ma'oindim. They always remain in the same position. Neshamas down here are called mahalchim in a pasuk in Zechariah and Asati lecha mahalchim. The soul, the person, you can transform yourself and become something extraordinary by climbing and marching through that board with all of its struggles. But keep your eyes on the goalie, on the destination. And then you reach the end, and when you reach the end, you become, so to speak, the wife, the spouse, the Shechina, that's one with Hashem. But as he said, you can't become the king, Vala Melech is nar einer, because the king is only one, but you become one, Yisrael v'kochabrichu kol echad, you become one with the king. And here, dear children, we have the 3 points. You have a soul which is godly. You are the link that connects creator to creation, as in the soccer game. And the reason you can do that is because you also have a piece of earth, which is a real part of you, the animal in you, the body in you, as in the chess game. And here, I finally leave you with this story about the Alter Rebbe. The Tzemach Tzedek was orphaned as a very young boy. His mother passed away, Rebbetzin Dvar Alei, and the Alter Rebbe raised him. The Tzemach Tzedek was treated by the Alter Rebbe as his own son, and he was always in the room of the Alter Rebbe. When the Alter Rebbe would daven, he was 3 years old. He made for himself a pair of tefillin. How does a 3-year-old make for himself a pair of tefillin? He took potatoes. The potatoes became the bottom. That went on his head and on his muscle, on his arm. And then the potato, he tied strings or shoelaces to the potato, and that became the ritzuas with which he wrapped the tefillin around his body. And this is how he would play when the Alter Rebbe would take off his tefillin. Tzemach Tzedek would take off the potatoes. The Alter Rebbe put on his tefillin, and the Alter Rebbe was in tefillin for a very long time. So the Tzemach Tzedek spent much of his day wearing potatoes, which were tefillin, and this is as a 3-year-old. One day, the Alter Rebbe said a maimer which began with the words Al Shloisha Dvarim Ha'olam Oimed. Al HaTorah V'al Avodah V'Gemilas Chasadim. The world stands on 3 pillars: Torah, service, and charity. And the Alter Rebbe says this maimer, and it's very deep, and the Hasidim do not comprehend it. So they ask him permission if they can go into his room and have him review the maimer a second time. And the Alter Rebbe says, Sunday morning after Shachris. We're now Sunday morning after Shachris, we'll review the maimer. Who? The elder Hasidim. There was a Chassid who was young, although he was a genius. His name was Reb Isaac Homeler. Reb Yitzchak Isaac Halevi Epstein, the rabbi of the city of Homel or Gomel. And Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac Halevi Epstein was a Goan Olam. In fact, he used to make a siyum on the whole Shas Erev Pesach, the whole Shas. And when he became a Chassid, Epstein was a very famous Lithuanian family, opponents to Chassidim. His father rent his garments and sat Shiva on his son, Rabbi Isaac Homeler, when he became a Chassid. And only the next Erev Pesach, when he saw that he made a siyum on the whole Shas, even after he became a Chassid, he relaxed and he accepted his child as a legitimate Jew, even though he went to the Alter Rebbe. But he was still a young man, so he didn't think that he could go into Chazara to the Alter Rebbe, because it was only for elder Hasidim who were much more developed and have been there for more years. It came Sunday, and they all went what was called Gan Eden HaTacht, in the room before the Alter Rebbe's room. They used to call the lower level of Gan Eden, I guess corresponding to the lower level of unity. And then the Rebbe's room itself, the Alter Rebbe's room, they used to call Gan Eden Ali, and the higher level of Gan Eden, because there's 2 levels of Gan Eden HaTacht and Gan Eden Ali. And they're standing Gan Eden HaTacht, and you know what Hasidim do? They peek through the the keyhole. They peek through, or whatever the opening was, to see what's happening inside. Rabbi Zakamal told the story, he peeks through, and he sees that the Tzemach Tzedek's potato peels got stuck at the table, and he couldn't go, and he was a mamish 3 years old. So the Alter Rebbe stopped his davening and removed the shoelaces. He untied it, and the Tzemach Tzedek was so happy, and they continued to run around the room. The Alter Rebbe took off his Rabbeinu Tam's tefillin, and he opened the door for the Hasidim to come in. Rabbi Zakamal stayed behind in Gan Eden Atacht. The Alter Rebbe sits on his chair, they're all standing. The Alter Rebbe says, somebody is left outside. So geblieben emitzer. So one of the elder Hasidim said, so geblieben a junge Mann. A young man is left outside. So the Alter Rebbe said, is was? Von a junge Mann ken doch werden. An alter Mann soll reingehen. From a young man, one day can become an old man. Let him come in. Let him come in. So they open the door. Rabbi Isaac becomes completely confused. He's lost. And he can't get it together. So they schlep him in, and it takes him a few minutes till he regains his consciousness, his composure, and he listens to the Maimer. To his mazel, right then, the Tzemach Tzedek gets stuck with his potatoes in between his legs, looking for toys and running around, and he's thinking to himself, I finally made it, and here the Tzemach Tzedek is there. The Tzemach Tzedek is pushing, trying to get closer to the Alter Rebbe, and Rabbi Isaac is, he's having these feelings of, is the Tzemach Tzedek really wants to get close, he wants to hear the Maimer, or he's looking for his toy. And as he's thinking about this, and the Alter Rebbe is already in the middle of the Maimer, the Alter Rebbe suddenly, in the middle of the Maimer, says in a niggin, these words, hert, du wirst wissen, as hert. He hears, one day you will be aware that he hears. 45 years later, then the Tzemach Tzedek was 3. When the Alter Rebbe passed away in 1812, Tov Kuf Ayin Gimel, the Tzemach Tzedek was 23. 45 years later, after the Mittler Rebbe passes away, Tes Kislev Tov Kuf Pei Ches, the 9th of Kislev, 1827. And the Tzemach Tzedek does not want to accept in Asiyas, especially that he has an uncle who's alive. The Alter Rebbe still has a son, Reb Chaim Avram, who looks just like the Alter Rebbe, and he's alive. Which is one of the ways they knew that the picture of the Alter Rebbe is an authentic picture, because people saw Reb Chaim Avram and they knew he was the splitting image of the Alter Rebbe. So Tzemach Tzedek doesn't want to accept the leadership. And finally he succumbs. He finally accepts it. And Rabbi Isaac Hamala comes for the first Shavuos. And the Tzemach Tzedek starts the Maimer. And which Maimer is it? And he's repeating the words that Rabbi Isaac heard 45 years ago, that Tzemach Tzedek heard when he was playing with the potato peels, 45 years ago as a 3-year-old child. So Rabbi Isaac is standing there, and again, he can't help himself. You're not always in control of, thoughts that fall into you, as it says in Tanya. So Rabbi Isaac thinks to himself, this is pretty, this is pretty cool, as we would say. It's called a kunz. He's showing a kunz. It's like a trick, pretty interesting tricks, but it's like a spiritual trick. Chabad, Chassidus didn't like tricks, even spiritual tricks. They weren't into tricks. Pnimius, everything has to be internalized. So he's thinking. Tzemach Tzedek stops the Maimer, and he says, what do you want from me? My grandfather is here, and he's telling me to review the Maimer, so I'm reviewing the Maimer. But now, the 12th of Tammuz, Yud Beis Tammuz, Tovshin Chava of 1966, the Rebbe, the grandson of the Tzemach Tzedek and the Alter Rebbe, asks, what did the Alter Rebbe mean? He's a young man, so he could become an old man. What is this, a joke? It's an anecdote? Of course, every young man can become an old man. In fact, I hate to tell it to you, but every young man becomes an old man. But this is the Alter Rebbe's genius saying a young man can become an old man. And Rabbi Isaac is completely flabbergasted. What did he hear that so overwhelmed him? It was a very long and elaborate discussion, but I'll share one point of it in 1 minute. The Rebbe said then that the Alter Rebbe introduced a Chiddush in Nigla, in Halacha, in Chassidus, and in Avodah. And he explained what the Chiddush was in Nigla, in Halacha. But I bring out to you now literally, briefly, one point. And that is, when he said that from a young man can become an old man, he was redefining how we look at potential. You know, I'm sure some of you, especially the fathers, heard many years in yeshiva, you have potential, right? And whenever you said about somebody he has potential, right? If you call somebody for a shidduch reference and you say he has potential, usually you stay away, you know? He has potential, right? Everyone has potential, of course. We believe in Beis Hillel, right? We believe in Bepoyel, not Bekoyach. Potential. He could. A young man could become an old man, sure. Potential. What the Alter Rebbe was saying then, and this is what astonished Rabbi Zekameler is, that you could live your life in a way in which your potential for the future can become part of your present reality. In other words, don't look at yourself only the way you see yourself now. Look at yourself today the way you have the ability to be in the future. And you could begin living that way today, even though you don't feel that you're not that person. But because you know this is your potential, this can be part of your reality today. That's what he was saying. And Rabbi Zekameler was overwhelmed because this was a transformation in his very character. And as a result, he can go in and hear the Maimer as though he was an elder man. If there's one thing the Alter Rebbe taught, it's what it means when you talk about the potential of a person, the potential of a Jew, the link between heaven and earth. But I could live with my potential frustrated. Or you have to be able to look at yourself and see what you contain inside. How much power you have, how much potential you have, and then start living it. Start actualizing it. Take your soccer ball and throw it into the goalie. Thank you very much.
Lo das kol rosoy decho